Hi everyone, my name is Tom Slater, Director at T2S Architecture Limited, and your host of the DesignA.I podcast. DesignA.I looks to explore how artificial intelligence is impacting the world of architecture, design, and the wider creative industries through candid conversations with leaders building the future. AI is powerful, but how can human innovation, endeavor, and creativity evolve alongside it? Today, for our first episode, we're delighted to be joined by Aaron Zimmerman, Director at Centro Plan and host of the Make Planning Make Sense podcast. Aaron, pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
Reciprocating the honor of being your first guest, that's why you're here. So thank you. It's a genuine honor to have you on the show. And I think in terms of the podcast, we'll split it into two parts. The first part, we want to just talk about yourself and your career and everything else. And then in the second part, delve into the nerdy world of artificial intelligence. So in light of that, can you just give our lovely listeners a bit of an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'm glad that you put in a little plug for Make Planning Make Sense, which is the podcast that we have for Centro. And it was an honor to have you as the first guest. That's available wherever folks listen. So hopefully people can check it out. I'm a director at Centro Planning Consultancy. We're a small practice based here in central London, up in Clerkenwell. And our sort of brand, we like to say quality over category. So we do a lot of hotels in the West End. We do a lot of residential in zones 2 and 3. It's not all London, of course, as well. We've got projects in Plymouth, Digbeth in Birmingham, in Manchester. So we are, I hate the word boutique, but it is along that kind of vibe, and poised to grow. So in a really good position in the market.
Amazing. I mean, yeah, the boutique thing, and we're a similar practice at T2S. Boutique means small, but it also means that tailored is probably a better word to use, right? You're tailored towards what your clients needs. And I think that's a big sell. That's a big sell for sort of whatever the scale of the client, to know that they've got someone on your back.
Yeah. We also kind of chew on the word forensic.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's just hard to describe. We're awesome. We're fantastic. We're absolutely GD amazing. And we are really proud of our position, being able to sort of code switch and communicate as effectively to clients about outcomes and success as we are talking to officers about planning and the balance and the negotiation that really sits at the core of the UK planning system.
Now, and we can collaborate that insofar as we've worked with Centro on numerous schemes and actually have a pretty good hit rate, I would say, over the last 5 years, certainly since Centro T2S has been set up. Pretty good hit rate, I would say. Yeah, I would say so. So just touching upon yourself then, obviously before Centro Plan, what was that journey to planning? Where did that all come from?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and you can tell from my accent that I wasn't born here in the UK. Not that my accent. So I originally studied political science, and I ended up working in the Office of Policy at the Food and Drug Administration. And it was a fantastic office, fantastic team. And I learned a lot about public health, but it wasn't my personal kind of interest. What really kind of made my eyes light up was the built environment. And through my early 20s, kind of coming around, really understanding that as an opportunity to kind of combine my experience in public service, my experience in political science from an education background, and this interest led me to get second master's at the University of Glasgow. So after that, I joined a consultancy here in London, and I joined Centro in 2020.
There's an interesting concoction of ideas in there, isn't there? All that kind of sort of formulating this cocktail of planning consultants. So it's interesting how it all kind of coalesces. You've got public interest in there. And obviously that's a big tick, right? In terms of, and public health, because the buildings that we design, the buildings that we build are a massive influence on public health. Obviously, the political science is an obvious one as well, isn't it? Because planning is inherently political. Interested just to touch upon the built environment. Is that what it was then? Was it that sort of link? Is obviously looking at it from an architectural perspective, was the interest, oh, that's a nice building, I wonder how that happened? Or was it more that you could understand how construction was both a health benefit and slightly political, and was that how it all sort of coalesced?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, because it wasn't just, oh, I went to Paris and Prague and I thought, well, this is pretty, I want to do this, right? It's not an aesthetic thing for me, it's a systems thing for me. And I always say I forget the stat because I haven't been able to find it again, but there was a great study about quality of life indicators. What are all of the things, if you had to list them all out, contribute to a quality of life? And the built environment, or the environment more broadly in which we live, contributes, I think, about 80% of those quality of life indicators. So it's not just that it's systems, it's not just that it's spatial, it's that it really matters. And listeners of my pod will know, and folks should definitely check it out, because I think you try to walk that line between a technical sort of consulting message and then also why this is important. It's a really, really good time to be in our sector, because I think that there's a lot of awareness about how badly we are falling behind on that key thing, which is delivery, output, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as a consultant, my clients' objectives and my objectives are aligned, not just because we're their consultant, but because we're participating in the process with the outcome of delivery.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've been in construction, started my architectural career in around 2006.
Yeah.
I don't recall a time in which our industry has been in the political debate as much as it currently is. And it's almost now, I saw an article on LinkedIn, and we'll try and find that and link it to when we post this on socials. But the guy, the letter was almost saying, look, we all know now that there is a challenge with housing. So if our potential new lovely prime minister says, well, we need to deliver homes, everyone will look at him and say, well, yeah. It's not now, we need to deliver homes is not the point. The point is actually, how are you going to do it? Because this is not you're not the first person to sort of flag it as an issue. But obviously you're probably not the first one to sort of face the challenge of trying to fix our planning system, if it indeed needs to be fixed.
Which it does.
Of course. No, it's fine. But I mean, what the question I was going to ask you was, do you think it needs to be fixed? But obviously the answer to that is obviously no. Yes, you do think it needs to be fixed. But I'm sort of interested with how, first of all, the debate is now gone well past, do we have a housing crisis? Yes, we do. The debate shifted to, how are we actually going to do it? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I was thinking the exact same thing. It's not an if, it's a how. And it's great to see governments taking this on as a key issue. And I think that they're absolutely right, that if they're able to sort out the built environment sector in economic terms, and again, really importantly, in terms of delivery, that is the ignition key to a virtuous positive cycle. Economically, in, again, quality of life, and in the sort of future potential and the capacity of our nation, I'm a British citizen now, of our nation to really continue to excel. And I think historically it has an amazing track record of excellence. And I also think that recently it's been confused as to how it can get back to that in a way that really aligns with the British self-identification. So it's really good, like I say, to see it in government. It's good to see that there's now more or less political consensus on the fact that this is a systemic failure and a challenge. What's interesting about it, to my perspective, is that the built environment sector knew this for decades. You know, we actually do understand how many homes need to be delivered relative to need. And even now that it's in the political discussion, strangely, planning in our sector isn't screaming about this as they should have been for decades. So it's a really good opportunity to try to build on this little bit of political capital and momentum that we have, and to make sure that the changes that we're trying to implement are genuinely effective in bringing about a positive outcome for the society.
It's also interesting that, I don't think this is the elephant in the room, Andy Burnham is probably going to become a new Prime Minister. Yeah. And I suspect the reason why there has been this sort of almost unchallenged rise to power on his part is because of the apparent success of Manchester. And I wonder if that Labour are thinking, and I don't want to delve into politics because it's tiresome, but I am wondering whether Labour as a political party and that whether the government have felt that maybe this guy because Manchester is a bit of a success story, certainly since the 90s. I worked in Manchester for a little while. It dipped a little bit because what happened in places like Liverpool and Manchester in particular is we built all of these apartments and then they were all sold to overseas developers and now no one lives in them. And I think you're seeing that a little bit in London at the minute as well, where we're saying let's build all these flats and no one lives in them.
I do want to challenge that a little bit because if you look at national vacancy rates, they're, I think, about 3%,
Right.
which is even lower than what a healthy kind of vacancy rate would be. So if the vacancy rates were more about 5%, then not only would residents need to compete for flats, but landlords would need to compete for occupants. And there would be an incentive to maintain their properties better, to invest in their properties more. But as things currently stand, thank God for the Renters' Rights Act, but as things currently stand, if you don't like somewhere, your options as an agent in the market to incentivize improvements are very, very low. Mm-hmm. So I'm not really convinced by the overseas investor element as housing shortage per se. Mm-hmm. Of course, they play a role in buying the properties, but the key interest in terms of housing capacity is whether those overseas investors then rent out their properties to people living in London. And overwhelmingly, they do.
Sure. I think my point I was more making was more on the delivery of what Manchester has become as a success story, and whether Labour think that they might be able to, take that model and apply it nationwide. But I think that's going to be a little bit trickier than, I don't think that's a plug and play solution at all.
Well, I think what we can see in Manchester over the past, I think exactly right, since the turn of the millennium, is a change in the concentration of residents who live in the city centre. And I think I was just talking actually to a colleague about this. In that period, from the millennium to now, that number has increased from about 10,000 to 100,000 residents in the city centre. And all of the knock-on effects of economic circulation that will be related to that. Not to mention, it's actually spatially, physically, just a nicer place to be now. And you can see it as you approach the city because they're actually allowing volume. They're actually focusing on ensuring delivery. And it's a little bit of, I think, maybe a healthier culture of everyone recognizing the benefits of it. Whereas in London, there's a little bit of a presumption, I think, sometimes of the LPA saying, yeah, no, duh, we know that you want to build here. Who doesn't? What have you done for me lately? And I think that kind of negotiation only fixation on the planner's role, especially in the public sector, is an inhibitor to delivery. And I think that that's a really tough conversation to have. But I think if you look at Manchester versus London and the way that their fortunes have been able to change at different paces, they're different cities in all sorts of respects, but the pace of Manchester's fortunes improving far outpace London's. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really interesting point to make. Yeah.
I think that when I moved down from that area to London, one of the big things that I noticed was how planning driven the environment was. For example, planning consultancy in Liverpool and Manchester wasn't really much of a thing in the 90s and the noughties and even the 2010s. And as soon as I moved down to London, all of a sudden you saw a culture of delivery where, well, of course, we need a planning consultant. So I think the complexity and the political complexity of the planning system in London is still far more, I don't even want to use the word advanced because I don't even know if it's a good thing, but it's more complicated than other cities. But also, and as a very, the basic dynamic was always in Liverpool, in Manchester and other areas. Well, you wanted to put forward a planning application. Great. Fantastic. This is going to be really good for the city. In London, we don't like this. We don't know why yet. But we just inherently don't like it. Or built on a confidence that, don't worry, there'll be someone else in the future that's coming along and going to have something better or something different. I think London has driven it because there's almost an arrogance that, well, we can refuse this because they'll come back again.
We can hold out for more.
We can hold out for something different. Liverpool and Manchester doesn't have that, particularly, I think, doesn't have that. And so I think the turn of the development of Manchester, what may actually happen is it may actually become more politically complicated and planning complicated, because all of a sudden they've got this confidence, well, actually, maybe we can ask for a little bit more. And that might be on that graph of Manchester development, may be in the post in a way, which is effectively what London has.
Yeah.
London is so confident in its own thing that they don't, they know the city's going to develop no matter what. And actually, I think that is the biggest stumbling block to development in London.
I think you're right. And we have to remember, and I think this is something that policymakers in the public sector don't tend to really focus on, but I think it's so important. Outcomes are downstream from development management, and development management is downstream from policymaking. So when my job was basically invented in the 1990s, it was because the capacity of officers in local authorities was identified as a bottleneck. And so the idea from the Barker Review was to say, all right, let's move that into the private sector. So by the time it gets to a planner, everything is sort of done and dusted, right? You have all of the assessments done. You have all of the evidence provided. Now, that sounds great, of course, but it's created a sort of dual dynamic where no longer are we front loading the work and doing it for them. We are still doing all the work in advance of that submission. And that's an important point unto itself. We're doing all of the work, right? But then because the officers have everything front loaded onto the private sector, when it gets to the officers, then it creates this us versus them. And I think that some people really do think that the negotiation and the maximum wringing of public benefit is the point. And of course, that's a challenge when you're not delivering enough homes. So to give you an illustration, it's extremely common in London for officers to say, well, those homes, that's not a public benefit. That's just what you're proposing to build. What are you doing for us in addition? And I think that mentality that providing homes isn't a public benefit is illustrative of a really unhealthy power dynamic for how planning has become what it is, and it has been in the 21st century.
And so really, the way that any government could tackle that challenge is to provide or place a far greater weight upon the fact that delivery of homes is the public benefit, and the delivery of the homes isn't the prerequisite.
Maybe, because we have to remember as well that the NPPF has put great or substantial or whatever positive weight on housing in all of its sort of iterations since it was introduced in 2012. That's not translated to an increase in delivery or an increase in perception of housing as a public benefit. So I think it's a really tough nut to crack, because I mentioned policymaking earlier. I think the overwhelming sort of presumption in policymaking is we'll decide what we want to see, but we don't know and we don't feel responsible for having to define it. I'm not talking about like design guide stuff. I'm talking about like a priority setting amongst the 30, 40 priorities. And I think that they come to this sort of mindset with the magic ingredient of, well, it's your job to figure that out. But I think that they need to also think about how policymaking would be progressed if they were the applicant. You know what I mean? So I appreciate that the London plan is bold and ambitious, and it should be, we can push the boundaries, we can be world leading. But in practice, it's become so complicated that a decision maker, not just applicants, right? Because we do understand all of this. This isn't me saying, oh, I don't understand the system. This is me saying I am a, premier professional in this, and I am part of that system.
And you advocate the system.
And I advocate the system. Planning is a good thing. If I wanted to have slap fights for money, I'd be in finance. Do you know what I mean? Like, this isn't a cash cow. So the idea is that, if we were more conscious of what priorities are, we would have better outcomes. The problem with having 30, 40 bold, but sort of hazily defined objectives that we all need to optimize to the nth degree is that not only does the applicant kind of just have to see what the officer is going to say because there's so much discretion, the officer then isn't supported by the policies, by the development plan to actually assess which priorities our top priorities amongst all of them, right? So the problem with a really, really bold, ambitious plan, if it's really, really bold and ambitious for every single element, is that you're going to have zero-sum situations where optimizing one thing would come at the expense of another thing. And they're both objectives, right? I'm sad to see genuinely that in the implementation of all of these policies, when zero-sum situations occur, then there's a resentment on the applicant's team. Why haven't you done this? Instead of an actual sort of practical dialogue. And I think dialogue is a really important word. We'll come on to that in the AI section.
Yeah. And I think the dialogue slash adversarial, and it's almost as if there's this sort of good guy, bad guy dynamic when you submit a planning application, and it isn't very helpful. Just to sort of tie up part one, I guess I'd sort of go back to sort of career and focus on yourself again in terms of career highlights, because obviously you talked about, this the strenuous planning process, but I'm assuming that you still love what you do, and as we sort of alluded to, you're advocating the process, so the process is the juice, so to speak. So when you look back at your career, would you sort of flag any sort of highlights or real sort of positive points?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of really good successes. 30-story apartment tower, just going through an S73 iteration in Poplar. A really interesting one at Piccadilly Circus as well. So 2 massive new advertising screens. Shouldn't say massive, but 2 extensive new
two sympathetically designed advertising screens.
No, they're going to look great. They're going to look great.
You can barely see them.
No, you will. So coming to Piccadilly Circus in probably about 2 years. It was an interesting one because it had everything to do with heritage. The screens are going to be on a grade 2 listed building. They are in a conservation area, of course. They are facing into 4 other conservation areas because these conservation areas converge here. It's Piccadilly Circus, so you can imagine most of the structures around it are listed. And we had an appeal a couple of years ago now that turned on these questions that are fundamentally questions of character, appearance, significance, and then also genuine understanding of a place. On paper, every reason pointed to, well, obviously that's not going to be allowed because it's on a listed building, because it's in a conservation area. But in practice, in reality, what is Piccadilly Circus as a place? It's a place of bustling activity. It's a place of civic scale, but it's not an austere place at all. And it's not a uniform place. We were really, really fortunate to have a great team and also to have an inspector who really genuinely approached heritage with the objectivity that I think is sometimes misplaced for simplicity in the planning practice.
Amazing. Okie dokie. I think that's a good place to end. Success story, Piccadilly Circus. If you haven't heard of it, Google it. And we'll call an end to part 1. Thank you very much. And then part 2, we'll go into more AI geeky stuff. So thank you. All right, everyone. How's it going? So this is part 2, where we delve a little bit more into the nerdy AI content. So starting off then, Aaron, Centro, are you guys delving into that world?
We are. And there are a few really interesting things we've discovered about it. So First of all, we're not a practice that is using AI to write planning statements just at the moment.
Is that a sensitive topic? Because you're saying it as if is that a sensitive topic?
I think that it might be sensitive to some people if they presume that the planning statement is the value that we add, the writing of the report. But I'm not really opposed to using AI for the writing of the planning statement, or at least to get it up on its feet in principle. Because I think the value that we add is the contribution to the development of the proposal, right? So we're in DTMs with you and the rest of the team, advising on policy, advising on not just policy, because we can all read, right? It's the trade-offs, the nuances, our familiarity with how officers and different authorities approach these different priorities. And the strategy itself, right? The third of those kind of main things we do is that interface that I mentioned before. We're client-facing, we're public sector-facing, and communication really is such an important part of our job. So yes, if people think, oh, well, they just use AI to write their planning statement. If that's all your planning consultant is doing for you, call me, because that is not really the way that we add value in a genuine sense. So I'm not opposed to that in principle. We've not been doing it yet. We started to dabble in AI about 18 months ago. We got Copilot because we have Microsoft computers, and it just wasn't really as powerful as we had hoped, and it wasn't really doing what we wanted it.
It's got a bad reputation in the AI world. Yeah. It's not right at the top of the list of large language models that are on the. Yeah, it's not got a good reputation.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. Recently, I've been experimenting with Claude by Anthropic, and I have to say I've been really, really impressed.
Do you subscribe to it?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, because I just think this is the reason why I asked that question is because AI can be something that is really, really accessible and actually something that you don't really have to buy into. So I think it's first of all an interesting step, and therefore places you within the top 10, 20% of planning consultancy companies that are therefore financially engaging and committing and using AI as a piece of software, as we would with Vectorworks or whatever software that we're using. So you've already financially committed to using AI.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's exactly right. And I will say we've not been using it for planning work per se. It's been really helpful in the administration and the sort of strategic business side of what Centro is looking to achieve in the next 18, 24 months. So what I do like about where AI is going and where it kind of is at the moment with the top level Anthropic models. So Opus, for example, and then there's one above that, but that's above our subscription rate.
Sure.
The benefit of it is the agentic characteristic of these more advanced models. So it's not just a prediction model, it's not just the vibrating superposition of the most likely next word. It has a reasoning capability and an agentic capability. And you can see it if you give it a complex prompt, you say, ask me questions as you go, because I need it to have this kind of outcome. It'll say, all right, and it'll say, ooh, all right, I'm checking this. I'm not really sure about that. Let me check over here. It's really, really interesting. And I think that it's been helpful for us in getting some sort of, strategic documents for just the operation of the business up on their feet in a way that you might, say, employ a marketing team for 6 weeks, 6 months, and you would get roughly the same product. The other way that we found that it's helpful is just time saving. So I said before, our value added as planning agents can be kind of categorized, right? Communication, scheme development, so kind of risk management in that sense, and planning strategy, which is also a risk management. Those things are really difficult to outsource to AI at the moment. But those are the most valuable things that we do. If you look at the time that we spend, though, over the course of a week, myself or any colleague, is most of our time communication and risk management and DTMs and strategy? No, right? Those are the most valuable things, but they take up probably the smallest proportion of our time. The thing that probably takes up more time than anything, and I imagine public sector is similar, is just moving information from one format to another. So we were talking about planning statements a minute ago. What is a planning statement other than just sort of a dirge of demonstrating that we've read all of the policies and that these reports meet that policy? But of course, it has to be laid out in a strategic way to meet the overall goals that we're trying to accomplish. If we can continue to use AI in a way that reduces the amount of time that we spend on just the processing and reprocessing of information, then we can hopefully use that time that we've freed up for ourselves in the actual value that we add. And I would be almost certain that the public sector would be on board with this, as long as they're extroverted to the extent that they're not, worried about picking up the phone or meeting somebody on site, because those person-to-person interactions are extraordinarily productive relative to the pre-app response that says, and I'm sure officers hate writing them as much as I'm unimpressed by them. Sometimes, most of the
If they
time.
got the address right every now and then,
Which is, well, policy blah, blah, blah says that this is an air quality management area. And it's like, oh my God, I feel bad for somebody who has to spend their time writing that down, because we all know, right? If we're just sort of, yak back, yak backs, remember those from the early 90s?
Yeah.
We're just yak backing policy expectations to each other, or saying this report meets that policy. What a waste of time. What an So if we're trying to move past just process for the sake of process, or process for the sake of managing the anxieties of such a complicated system, AI, I think, could be really helpful. But in that sense as well, we have to remember that AI is not a savior, it's a tool. And so in a way, the fact that it's sort of highlighting how much time we're spending doing something that even a current AI model can do is sort of holding a black mirror to the process that we are all participating in, and really highlighting how unproductive a lot of the time and work that we need to do really is.
Of course, productivity is the key word, isn't it?
Productive. Yeah.
Being productive and productivity. AI is ultimately a piece of technology, and irrespective of what that technology is, there's a point in which we have to embrace it and use it. But equally, human beings, we can choose to not use it if we don't want to. I always make this kind of slightly basic point with my wife, who loves books but just refuses to use a Kindle because she just wants to read a book.
That's fair.
And that's a very small, basic way of saying, look, I accept that there's this technology available that means I could have effectively the world's books at my fingertips, but I want that book. I want to smell it. I want to touch it. I want to have that sort of tell the story through that way. So AI is ultimately something that we will use. But I think touching upon the productivity thing, it's about us as consultants and professionals targeting the high value tasks, and then there's the low value tasks.
Yeah.
And if we can focus our energy on the high value stuff, because that's ultimately what we're getting paid to do, and get the AI to do the other stuff, I think as consultancy companies, that's something that I think we are going to have to do. Even if we want to be a Luddite about it, I don't think you're going to survive, because you're going to be competing with companies that have all of that low value stuff nailed in a really efficient way.
Yeah.
And all of their fees are focused on the high value stuff.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And, I told my mom once, she's similar about reading books, and I said that she was being deliberately anachronistic. She said, I don't know what that means, but she knows what that means. It's not just, it's not just about being for the technology or being against the technology. It's about what that quality of the experience is. So if somebody wants to read on a Kindle or a book, there's no difference in productivity there, right? It's a choice about the kind of experience that they're having. All for that. If we're just adopting AI to trying to like make our decisions for us, or just trying to like do more of what we are doing now, then I think that, like you say, the people who are going to approach it that way are going to miss the boat. I think what AI can really do is free up our time to do the productive stuff. And I don't mean just productive for our clients, although it will be. And I don't mean just productive in terms of delivery, although it should be. It's productive for the quality of our lived experience, right? And I try to look at my adoption of AI through that lens. If I'm using AI deliberately to do the things that free up my time for better things, then it's a productive use of AI.
And again, ignore the AI bit. And I've repeated this a few times to some of the junior guys in my office about speed, because when you talk about, when you have a conversation as a director to a colleague and you talk about speed, they automatically think, oh, well, that's just because you want to be really efficient from a commercial perspective. And of course that's true. But what I say to my guys is, if you imagine 8 hours as an actual limited resource, and within those 8 hours, you wanted to do the absolute best thing that you could do, and you spent 6 of it on something that you could have done in 2. So what you've done is you've freed up those 4 hours. So for 2 hours, you can do the really basic stuff, whether in an architectural perspective, it's just getting the CAD right. And then you've got 8 hours to make it look really fucking good. That's where you win. It's about being more efficient and that productivity, being more efficient in those 8 hours as a finite period of time. And any technology should be able to help you to do that. And AI is just another version of that.
When it's used correctly, absolutely. And, there will be a point where we do have to have that discussion. Is that taking decision-making capacity, or is that taking the decision-making authority away from a human? I think that having that discussion now is focusing on a question that is still pretty far on the horizon. The benefit that I see focusing on AI now is that ability to do the parts of our jobs that are not only more productive, right, but are also the joyful parts. Allowing ourselves time to travel to the council's offices, or the council's officers having time to travel to site to meet the applicant's team, and actually having those conversations. And I would venture to say that that's everybody's favorite part of the job. I mean, we had a meeting years ago at Camden's offices in King's Cross. Gorgeous building, by the way. It was a little bit of a tense meeting. There was a little bit of disagreement about where this particular project was at the moment. So we have our meeting. It's all very formal. But it was way more productive than an email. And then at the end of the meeting, they said, do you want to see our roof terrace? We were like, yes, we do, right? Those are the points that are actually nice things to have, right? Being in communication with each other. Another kind of more general example is that value that we add as communication, as communicators. So if you look at, a project where we're chasing the officer, sometimes, sure, they might just not want to talk to us, but more often than not, in fact, almost always, they say, I just don't have time. I don't have time. I'm sorry, I've got so many projects. I don't have time to be on the phone with you. Ironically, the time it took them to write that email, reminding the applicant how busy they are, probably took longer than the phone call that could have happened. But also, it's just like not a nice lived experience.
Sometimes it's probably the mental capacity if they're
damn bro.
Well, but if they're delving into a task, and you can talk about, again, people talk about getting obstructions and sort of getting. You don't, if you're delving into a task, you don't want to be disrupted. And so sometimes the planners are thinking, right, I've set an hour of my day and I'm getting a phone call. I'd just quite like to not to be disrupted right now. But something that you just talked about there, again, in terms of efficiency and time and social element, just reminds me of during COVID. Do you think about how the industry slightly changed after COVID? Where before COVID would actually meet in person, right? Shock, horror. You'd have a pre-app in person. And then COVID came along, and then we all really figured out that Microsoft had this thing called Microsoft Teams, which none of us used in 2018.
No one used it. How long has it been there? It's kind of a question.
No one used Microsoft Teams in 2018.
Yeah.
No one used Zoom. No one knew what the hell Zoom was. And all of a sudden then we used it. And the industry went, oh, this is great. Because instead of like traveling halfway across London or wherever, you could have a DTM. I mean, I've worked on big projects in London, or biggish projects. And often the DTM is every month, and there's 15 people around a table.
Mm-hmm.
Why? You've just wasted 4 hours of 15 people's day to talk a load of nonsense that you could do remotely. And that's the way the industry went. However, now it's kind of moving the other way, where pre-apps are starting to happen in person. Because sometimes, we actually quite like the pre-app in person thing, because you get to build a rapport. You get to have that sort of nice dialogue. It's just quite nice meeting people.
Yeah.
And then equally from a coordination architecture perspective, it's great having DTMs and design reviews online, but it doesn't replicate printing a drawing off on a table, standing next to the engineer and just said, can you just move that beam, please?
Yeah.
And so it will twist the other way, and AI will, because it's such a new technology, we're adapting and using it, and it's like a new toy that we've got at Christmas. And we're going to have to figure out a way that there'll be that journey of development of us saying, this technology is great, we're going to do this. And then there'll be that point in which the technology might dip a little bit, and everyone's going, yeah, but maybe we can just sort of tailor in a certain way. We'll use a little bit of AI here in this little box, but then focus on everything else.
Yeah.
Because at the minute, it just feels like a bit of a free-for-all, doesn't it? And I don't think the language of some of the leading owners of the companies and the CEOs is helping. They're creating this existential crisis. Lads, this isn't, and they're mainly lads. You're not helping here. I mean, you're saying it's going to take over the world. Really, you've just invented something new, and we're just all figuring it out. So can we just curtail this end of world situation language?
Yeah, I mean, some of it could be arguably sensationalized, right? Anthropic had a model that they said, we've got this new model, but we can't release it because it's too good at finding security vulnerabilities.
And that's an interesting marketing campaign, isn't it?
Yeah. And I do think that the leadership at Anthropic, and maybe to a more mixed extent at OpenAI, does have sort of a public good weight on their shoulders. But also it's a little bit sort of fatigue driving to have the leaders of a company say, oh, this might create Ice-9, or like this might create a bioweapon that could just wipe out the species, but we won't do it, but someone's going to have to continue developing it, right? I know exactly that kind of round-robin conversation. It's a mixture of hype and virtue signaling and genuine corporate responsibility. And yeah, I'm kind of with you. I'm a little bit past that. Like, fine, okay, yeah, we get it. It's sort of like the internet when it first came out, and people were afraid, like, well, you could just download the design for a bomb. And you know what's happened? Not really much.
100%.
Yeah.
But I think that just in terms of
the stakes are higher, though. Don't get me wrong. It's not
they
just
are,
like,
they are higher. Yeah. But I think what's interesting with the leaders of the AI companies, and this is something that came up on the rest is Politics podcast. They did an AI special with Rory Stewart, and he made this really interesting point that a lot of these guys are, and it's a slightly derogative term, they're nerds, right? And so this is what Rory, but there's a serious point to it. So the language, the information they use, it's Lord of the Rings, Star Trek, Space Odyssey. There's always this good guy, bad guy, end of the world dynamic. And you can hear that in the language that Elon Musk in particular, very much sees himself in that sci-fi world of, I'm the guy that's going to save the planet. And you can hear it when he gives these speeches and in his rhetoric. And so I don't really think that is helping either.
No, I think you're right. And as a nerd, I hope people did understand it.
But like,
on behalf of nerds everywhere, I
think we're still upset nerds.
I hope that listeners and watchers appreciated my Ice-9 reference from Kurt Vonnegut. But there is kind of a question that remains, nerd or jock, right? How this will continue to play out. The risks are real, but how proportional are those risks to the benefits, and how likely, is it to genuinely, say, end our species?
I think the point I was more making was that in as you describe yourself in there, I'm not quite sure about that, but you're into political science, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's an interesting point, because the political science makes you look at things from a human's perspective, and it's grounded in politics, and you've obviously got that knowledge of politics, which is very, very real. And the difference with a lot of the rhetoric and what I was referring to earlier, the knowledge based of Lord of the Rings or whatever it might be, is it's fictionalized. It isn't real.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that is helping, because if these guys are going to be so wealthy and they're going to be so powerful, obviously Elon Musk has kind of dipped his toe in the political world, which didn't last very long, because he did have this sense of struggling to communicate with actual human beings. And so I think that's the disconnect that I'm referring to, where these guys are clearly super intelligent, but their intelligence is based within a world of fiction, when what we could do with is just some hard-nosed politicians to sort of take the reins of this, to ground it down in human beings using this technology.
Yeah, so we're coming on to the question then of regulation, right? And frameworks about what is allowed, what isn't allowed, what the red lines are, and who has a third-party oversight of that. I take your point about the nerds. I see what you mean now about nerds. The comedian Hannah Gadsby says it's remarkable that we've outsourced the way that we communicate. She's talking about social media, but we've outsourced the way that we communicate to people who have trouble communicating. And I think that's a really interesting point.
I kind of knew what the joke was going to be when you told half the joke. It's totally true.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm really glad that anybody's listening and watching to this episode.
Yeah.
But get the fuck offline. Do you know, can I swear on here?
Yeah. Sure.
Get the fuck offline.
I think I already did.
Close Facebook. Close the opinion section. Talk to someone you know and love. Like, it's kind of that simple. But that's a social media discussion. I think for AI, I'll be genuinely worried about the end of the world once AI helps us solve the fatality of cancer. If we have a medical breakthrough like that was driven by AI, then it really can create the bioweapon that can wipe out humanity.
Albeit it will be dressed up in a wave of positivity that you feel, oh, what amazing that you've solved cancer, but then,
well, there's different things. It's good to solve cancer.
It's a very positive.
I'd like to go on record saying it's good to solve cancer. Like, if we can make cancer non-fatal, then what I mean is that that's an actual demonstration of a capability.
Yeah.
That could lead to genuinely drastic things if it were misapplied.
It would be an example of them doing something that humans have tried to be doing for 50, 75 years and have not been able to do so. And that would be very much a show of strength from the AI perspective. But just going back onto Centro and the use of AI, so do you guys, because the way we use it at T2S at the minute is very sort of plug and play, and we're not necessarily looking. I think what we are going to have to do is be more AI plugs into our process, so plug and play would be the easiest way I would describe it, where we go and use AI and we use it and we box it off and then we go back. And I quite like that dynamic anyway. I think when it comes the other way around is when it starts to get a little bit scary. But obviously process driven and marketing is areas that we always try to explore. So you touched on it from your perspective, the marketing stuff. And I do think AI and marketing is going to be very powerful beyond the AI driven LinkedIn posts. The slot. Which I think we're already, again, if we imagine that curve of or upward trend of us using AI, I think we've already reached the point of, can I not get the AI slot, please? We've already spotted that. And so we will learn, and then the people spitting out the AI slot will no longer spit out the AI slot. But in terms of you guys, obviously there's that strategic marketing that you talked about. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more? That sounded really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've used it in marketing for, like I think I was saying before, that kind of, what would we get if we engaged a marketing consultant? What are the sort of, well, any marketing consultant will tell you the first thing you need to do is X, right? AI can do that now. And that's really helpful for us because we're not in marketing, right? We have a separate expertise. So in terms of cutting out that 6-month process with a marketing team, getting to where we would get to at that point, AI is already there, and we can get there in an afternoon to at least get some kind of document and some kind of points that we can then discuss as a team, right? It's not creating an action plan that then we follow. It's creating a sort of framework that we can then discuss, right? It's just a basis of human decision. Where we are definitely not keen to use AI is in content generation. And it's related back to the podcast that I created for Centro. Our value added, part of that is communication. And so if our content is just AI slop, then we're not actually selling ourselves. We might be getting our logo out there. We might be getting eye-catching images out there, but we're not actually helping potential clients and our counterparts in the public sector understand who we are. And that human element, I think, is going to be more important than ever, which I think is the point that you're absolutely making, right? And so the marketing, I don't think, is going to serve us if we lose that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the inspiration of the podcast was this sort of, not necessarily paradox, where AI is going to be so incredibly good at replicating almost anything that's digital, that what it might do, and it may not. And of course, the point of the podcast is to invite people on that's obviously challenge this view. What it might do, in my view, is almost undermine the digital, that everybody immediately is cynical towards it, to think, well, that might be AI. How do we even know? I mean, how many times have you seen a video now online? You think, I don't even know if that's real or not. But what you will know is real is this. What you will know is real is that meeting that you had with the client or the planning consultant. And so that human touch, in my view, might become even more precious, because the digitalized is going to be almost not undermined, but it's going to be seen almost inferior to the personal, to that human connection.
It already is inferior. We know already that the digital is inferior. And so if LinkedIn, no offense to the corporate owners or to their business model, if LinkedIn just becomes a bunch of slop where people are throwing AI generated nonsense into a void, fine. Good riddance. No, it's helpful enough to, again, shine that black mirror on what we are doing in the digital space. And if the outcome is that we realize that the digital space is no way to live relative to actual genuine human connection and face-to-face interaction and meeting in person, going to site, I'd be all for that. And I think that actually genuinely is the sort of social media parallel to the ways that I see it benefiting the sector. If we can use AI to disconnect ourselves from the things that aren't connecting us to each other, and we can spend that time genuinely providing value with strategy, genuinely improving delivery and outcomes, because if you're in the built environment sector and you're not outcome focused, then you're probably in the wrong profession. And bypassing all of that nonsense, I would love it, genuinely.
Amazing. And I think that might be a beautiful place to end on that little bit of positivity there. Humans, we're not that bad.
We're all right,
We're pretty good. We're pretty good. So yeah, thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us. First ever episode. Amazing stuff. And thank you for listening. And that's a wrap.